helped my brother with his medical bills, but now my entitled sister expects me to buy her a penthouse, and my mother is furious that I refused. I'm a 36-year-old woman, the oldest of 3 kids. My brother Percy is 34, and the youngest is my sister Molly, 28. Growing up, Percy and I were raised normally, but for some reason, Molly was treated like she was literally a princess. I guess it was the fact that she was kind of a surprise for our parents, and being the youngest, she was always treated differently. I think that's part of the reason why she grew up to be a totally spoiled brat. My dad had some sense and would still reprimand her and try to get her to behave, but my mother? No. There was no chance she would ever say a word against her dearest Molly, nor would she tolerate anyone else speaking up against her behavior, which was obnoxious, to say the least. Percy and I were significantly older than her, so until the age of 25, we just took everything she said with a pinch of salt and tried not to mind. Mind you, she said some pretty horrible stuff to us. When she was a teenager, she constantly made fun of our appearance since she believed she was the prettiest of us all. The worst part? We couldn't even deny it because she did inherit our mother's genes, and she actually was quite attractive. But on top of that, she would also make fun of weird stuff like the majors we had chosen, the line of work we were in, and whatnot. One time at Thanksgiving, we got into a major fight because she straight up told Percy that he was going to be an unemployed burden on the family just because he was a literature major. Another time, we ended up not speaking for weeks because she told me that if I continued working such long hours every day, I'd never find a boyfriend with my eye bags since nobody wants people who aren't even attractive and, on top of that, can't give them time. That's just the kind of person she is, overly boisterous, egoistic, and constantly belittling people around her. She has always been this way, and this behavior has only ever been encouraged by our mother. My dad turned a blind eye, but my mother would laugh at the things Molly said, no matter how hurt the other person felt. She always passed it off as a joke, even though we could tell from Molly's face that she was completely serious. If we tried to retaliate, my mother would claim we were being sensitive. Molly always had our mother wrapped around her finger, and we hated her for that. 8 years ago, after my father passed away, we finally started drifting apart. Both Percy and I began seeing less of our mother and Molly. Despite the fact that my dad also favored Molly to some extent, he was still the glue holding the family together. Once he was gone, Percy and I really didn't feel like visiting Molly and our mother on holidays or seeing them as often as we used to when our father was alive. After his death, we would only meet them at family events hosted by other people, occasionally on Thanksgiving, and maybe on Christmas some years if we felt like it. Honestly, we were better off for it because they didn't try to keep in touch with us either. My dad was pretty well off, and so is my mother, so they had enough money to get by. Percy and I also managed to build lives for ourselves separately. It was like Percy and I were on one side, and my mother and Molly were on the other. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking my video. There was this wall between us. Personally, I liked the wall. That's how the relationship has been between the 4 of us, so I really don't think they should have any expectations from me because I don't have any from them. But recently, I learned that the situation on their end might be a little different. A couple of weeks ago, I helped Percy out with his medical bills after he fractured his ankle. Since his insurance only covered hospital bills, I had to take care of all the other expenses like his medication, visits to the physiotherapist, and hiring a full-time nurse to help him since he lives alone. He tried to convince me not to pay for all of this since he could really afford it, but he was in between jobs. He didn't want to spend his money until he had established his online magazine, which is why he quit his teaching job in the first place. Besides, I'm the CFO of a company, and we are doing pretty well financially, so money isn't a problem for me. I was glad to help my brother out. For some reason, when my mother and Molly found out about it, they thought this was a free pass to ask me for anything they wanted, assuming I'd just hand it out to them like I was Santa Claus. That's why I'm in this situation right now, because I said no to helping Molly buy her first apartment. 3 days ago, I randomly received a phone call from Molly while I was working. She told me she had found an apartment she really liked and wanted to buy it. Since she was now 28, it was getting embarrassing for her to tell people she was still living with our mother. She needed my help to pay for the apartment since she could only manage half the price. It was a penthouse apartment, and they're insanely expensive. Help me reach my first 1,000 subscribers. Your support is what makes this journey possible, so don't forget to subscribe. She knew I'd helped Percy with his medical expenses, so now she wanted a favor too. It was bizarre because, for the last 8 years, we've barely had proper conversations. Even when we did meet, it was mostly out of obligation, and even then, she found it hard to be nice to us. Now she thought I'd just agreed to pay for her first apartment. For context, Molly is a freelance graphic designer. I'd respect that if she did any work at all, but she's never been to design school, doesn't have a degree, and I don't think making a couple of posters for our father's business that he didn't even use qualifies her as a graphic designer. Naturally, she can pretend all she wants that she only works with exclusive clients, but these clients are mostly family, and even then, she only gets the opportunity because my mother forces them to give her jobs to keep her busy. It's a hobby at best, not a job. It's not surprising she's still living with our mother. I told her straight up that I wasn't going to help her with anything. She's 28 and could get a real job to pay for the apartment herself. She argued that I helped Percy with his medical expenses even though he had money and she didn't. She claimed that, as the oldest sibling, it was my duty to look after her. I told her the situation with Percy was different. I helped him because he was in between jobs and has a good relationship with me, one he's bothered to put effort into. That's not the case with her, so I didn't need to help her. Of course, I didn't say all of this to her, I just said no and hung up. She tried to call me a few more times, but I muted her and ignored her for the rest of the day. When I got home, I received a phone call from my mother. She was furious, which I expected, knowing saying no to Molly would make her mad. At first, she just started whining about how unfair everyone was to poor Molly. She said she hadn't expected me to play favorites among my siblings. She went on to tell me Molly had finalized this apartment after looking for a long time. Now that she wanted to move in, she'd first asked for help from my uncle, my dad's younger brother, who now runs the family business. After my father's death, it had been clear to me that my uncle would take over the business. That's why I chose a different path. Percy and Molly weren't interested in taking it forward either, so our uncle took over. My dad's equity shares were transferred to my mother after his death, according to his will, and she lives comfortably off that money. It's a successful company, but I guess my dad didn't account for Molly still living off their money years later. She doesn't live a normal lifestyle either, she likes to live extravagantly. My mother said she was finding it harder and harder to support Molly, so she was relying on me to help. She claimed giving Molly the money now would make things easier in the future. It was all I could do not to roll my eyes. I told her it wasn't my problem. Molly could get a real job and maintain a stable income to afford the home she wanted, or suck it up and continue living with her mother until she was 35. That's when my mom got really mad. She started telling me I was ungrateful and wouldn't be in my position if not for how my parents raised me. She said I needed to pay off my debts by helping my siblings. I didn't even understand her logic. I told her my decision was final and was about to hang up when she threatened to go no contact with me. Her threat didn't faze me. Judging from the past 8 years, we're already low contact, so going no contact wouldn't make much of a difference. Her threat pissed me off, though. I told her Percy and I had made peace with the fact that things would be different after our dad passed, since we knew she had her favorite. She had no right to tell me it was unfair of me to play favorites. I was doing it, and I wasn't sorry. I also told her she was free to go no contact if she wanted because I was used to that treatment. To her, nobody apart from Molly existed. She'd stopped treating Percy and me like her children and acted like we were supposed to live for her and Molly's sake. Well, Percy and I have our own lives, and we don't owe anything to her or Molly. After saying all of that, I felt relieved. My mother yelled at me, saying she'd never speak to me again. I chuckled and told her I was fine with that. I added that it was great she'd made the decision quickly because now I wouldn't have to invite her to my wedding. Maybe I could make space for someone more deserving. That caught her attention, but before she could ask about it, I hung up and blocked her and Molly. Molly was wrong. people actually do want to date career-driven, ambitious women. Otherwise, I wouldn't have found my boyfriend, Jackson, a 37-year-old man. We've been together for almost 5 years. My mother and Molly have met him a few times, and he knows about our strained relationship. A couple of weeks ago, after we got engaged, we decided to have a small, private engagement party. We're getting married in a few months. I'd been contemplating whether to invite my mother and Molly to the ceremony. Eventually, I decided maybe I'd invite them just to be nice. Now, I don't think it's necessary. Yesterday, Jackson received a message from my mother on social media. She told him that I had blocked her and Molly everywhere, but said she just wanted me to know that she was incredibly disappointed with me. She mentioned that since I had shown her where she stood, she and Molly had decided to cut me off permanently. She said she hoped I was happy that I had finally ended whatever little family connection we had. I don't understand why they're blaming me, but I feel really bad about it. So, am I the one at fault for telling my mother that I was fine with her cutting me off? Update 1. Hi everyone. First and foremost, thank you so much for all the love and support you have shown me in the comments section. It made me realize that I was being stupid and emotional and that I didn't need to worry about my mother's feelings. They have never worried about mine. I spoke to Percy about this as well, and he shared the same opinion as many of you in the comments. He said they were just trying to manipulate me with their words and play on my emotions to get me to apologize, but I didn't need to fall for it. I knew where I stood, and I had done the right thing. When Jackson and I discussed this, he mentioned that my mother and Molly seemed really hurt by my behavior. That was part of why I had been feeling guilty about it. Obviously, he didn't say outright that I was guilty or that I should apologize, but I could tell he found the situation awful. He was trying his best to be on my side without dismissing my mother and Molly entirely. I realized that Jackson was really close to his family, so it was probably hard for him to see things turning out like this. Whenever he met my mother and Molly, they were always on their best behavior, so he didn't fully understand how strained our relationship was. I had Percy explain things to him, and after that, Jackson's opinion changed almost instantly. He told me that if his parents had ever acted like that with him and his siblings, he would have cut them off without a second thought. Now that this is all sorted, all of us have blocked the two of them. It finally feels good to sever ties after so long of maintaining a pretense of being a family when we haven't truly been one for as long as I can remember. My mother has always preferred Molly over Percy and me. Now, we prefer our peace of mind over her. I'm actually thankful this happened because it brought much-needed confrontation. Otherwise, we might have continued this act for the sake of appearances for the rest of our lives. Update 2. It's been a week since I last spoke to my mother. Percy and I had blocked both her and Molly, so we had no idea what was going on with them. This morning, however, our uncle contacted us. He told us that my mother had decided to transfer half of her shares to Molly. He didn't think this was a good idea because Molly was incompetent and had no business acumen. He reached out to us because he wanted us to convince her not to do this. At first, Percy and I didn't understand the big deal, but our uncle explained that my mother was also demanding Molly be given voting power in the company. Since our uncle was in charge and running the company, this could spell trouble. My uncle didn't want to confront my mother directly because she was insistent and difficult to reason with. After discussing it briefly with Percy, we decided we couldn't let this happen. We visited our mother to talk in person, despite promising ourselves we'd never speak to her again. When we arrived, Molly was, of course, present. Her presence made the discussion more difficult, but we ignored her and spoke directly to our mother. We explained what we had heard and told her it was a terrible idea. At first, she ignored us. When we repeated ourselves, she finally looked up and told us we had no right to tell her what to do after the way we had treated her. She said she wanted nothing to do with us and demanded we leave. Molly chimed in, accusing me of jealousy and claiming I couldn't stand to see her happy. I tried to reason with my mother, reminding her that our father had explicitly stated he didn't want us involved in the company. His brother, our uncle, was the only person he trusted to run it. I told her that going against this would disrespect our father's wishes. My words seemed to make her pause, but Molly continued yelling, trying to derail the conversation. Eventually, my mother told us all to be quiet and asked Percy and me to leave. She said she would think about it and let our uncle know her decision, but she wanted no further contact with us because of how disrespectful she found our actions. We left, hoping she would reconsider. Update 3, it's been 2 weeks. Our uncle informed us that, after much deliberation, our mother decided Molly wouldn't get voting rights in the company. She acknowledged that Molly hadn't earned her place and respected my father's wishes. However, my mother did transfer preferred shares to Molly, ensuring she'd have a stable income. I'm relieved the company won't suffer because of her incompetence. Our relationship with our mother remains non-existent, and the same goes for Molly. For those asking, just because my father didn't leave us shares in the company doesn't mean we didn't inherit anything. Percy, Molly, and I received other assets, but I didn't mention them earlier because they're not relevant. Update 4, it's been a few months, and we've had zero contact with my mother and Molly. Percy and I are happier than ever. I'm especially thrilled because I'm getting married in a week. Invitations went out a month ago, and, unsurprisingly, neither my mother nor Molly received one. Apparently, when they found out, they flipped out and asked other relatives not to attend my wedding. Thankfully, most people ignored them. They seem to be trying to spin their current situation as noble, Molly supporting our mother by living with her in a fancy penthouse they can't afford without each other. It's ridiculous, but no longer my concern. Percy's magazine is thriving, and I'm about to marry the love of my life while managing a successful career. Everything Molly claimed about me turned out to be false. The joke is on her.